Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again. This is part 5 in a series of videos making up a tutorial called Building a Markdown Blog with React. And in the last video what we did was we added a root to a static page, which was our blog's about page. And in this video what we're going to do is we're going to add a dynamic root, which means that we'll be able to render any number of individual blog posts as pages just by creating one root. Right, for example, in the last video, we created an about page. And remember, with that about page, what we did was we created the content for it in a file called about.md. And then using a little bit of JavaScript cleverness, we brought in that markdown as the about page content rather than ejecting our create React app and updating our webpack config and adding a new package. We just used a little bit of we just made some JavaScript logic that helped us out to bring in the markdown file as a string that we could then pass in to our source prop in our Markdown component, which parses our markdown for us. But for each individual blog post, we don't want to create a static root like we did with the about page. Otherwise, we would have potentially, thousands of roots and thousands of, page files. We don't want to do that. We want to use a simple blog post page template, and that's what we're going to do today. So first, maybe what we should do is create the page template. So go into your pages folder, create a new file, and you can call it post.js. We'll need our layout. Alright, and we'll just try to render an individual post page to see if this is working first. But to do that, we'll need a root. So go into your index.js file again. Bring in your post page. Okay, now for example, we could just create, actually, make things easier. We could just create a static root called post and use our post as a component, the post that we brought in, the post file. And if we run our project, and we go to that address, we'll see that that page renders. Alright, but if we try to add an ID to it, like say the number 1, right, we get nothing. So what we want is a dynamic root. And we'll need to change our root component just a little bit, so we won't need this. We'll use render. And we'll pass props to our post component. then of course we'll want to use a variable ID, so we'll use the ID parameter here. Okay, so now when we go back, or we try to look at this address, the page, to see if there is a page corresponding to this address, we don't see anything. Right, but if we type in, say, 1, right, the page renders. But if I type in an ID of this is not a valid ID, it also renders, right? So basically, we haven't done anything to check whether or not the ID is valid. So as long as you have something tacked on at the end of the after the slash following your post text, it's going to render that page, that post page. So we need to make sure that we have a valid ID and then actually render the page that we want to render, which we'll determine according to the blog post ID. And if you recall, the IDs were just these Unix timestamps that we assigned to each post. Right, so for now, go back to your post page, and you see that here we're passing in some props to our post component. So what happens if we take a look at those props? Alright, so we are on an individual post page. If we look at the console, we see there's a props object here. And if we take a look at it, we can see that it has several properties: history, location, and then the one property we're going to pay attention to is this match property. And in particular, it has a property called params, which has itself a property called ID. And what it does is it picks up our ID from the ID that we add to the URL here. Okay? So we're going to use this information about the props object to help us. And in particular, we see that if we have props.match.params.id, we can actually see this value right here. So I can type that in here, props.match.params.id. And now all we log to the console is that ID associated with this URL. All right, but now we need to make sure we have valid IDs that correspond to actual blog posts that exist in our blog. So as you may have guessed, we'll have to bring in the post list. And right now we are in the pages folder, right? So we have to get out of the pages folder. All right, and then we can add that file extension, or that file. We can make sure that we're bringing it in just by logging things to the console. And then we see that we are bringing in the list of posts. Each post has the corresponding metadata and content. All right, good. So now you could think that if you don't have a valid ID, you would like to send someone to a 404 page, right? A page not found. So we can create that before we do anything. And we'll just call this page not found. Don't know how too philosophical you want to get with this message, but it serves our purposes. Style this using the pages.css style sheet. Okay. So that should be all right. So go back to your post file, or your post.js file, your post page. We already know this is working. So now what we'll need to do is check and see if this is a valid ID or not. So first, let's create a value called valid ID. All right, we're using numbers as our IDs here, so we can immediately get rid of, say, if somebody enters in letters as an ID, that'll automatically come up as not a valid ID. So this would be props.match.params.id. And just to make sure that we're getting the right value. And maybe you might think I check things a little bit too much, but I like just to make sure that every step of the way I'm not making a mistake, which, you know, as you know from watching my videos, I make quite a few mistakes. Alright, here it's saying not a number. And that's because we're using the parse int, so if we type in 3, it's okay. Good. Alright, so now what we would like to say is that if there isn't a valid ID, we want to redirect them to our 404 page. Now actually we need something from React Router DOM here, and that's going to be redirect. So if I just type in capital R, I see that comes up, and we're going to use that here. Okay, and where are we going to redirect it to? We're going to redirect it to the 404 page, so we can say here, and I'm going to actually create a route with the path 404. Okay, so go into your index.js file, and let's bring in not found. And this will be a static root. Okay. So again, we're saying that if we don't have a valid ID, then we'll get redirected to our 404 page. All right, so now we go to our home page, and then we try to go to a page that doesn't have a valid ID, and for right now valid ID just means not an integer. So we'll say post / hey. Good. So we get redirected to our 404 page, right? And we see our message here. All right, so that's working. So now what we want to do is, if we do have a valid ID, then we want to find out if that matches any of the IDs in the post list. And if it does, then we'll display that post. So we have our post list already imported, so we can say, actually first we want to create an object, right, that we're going to bring our data in from. And I'm just going to call that fetched post. And for now, just initialize it as an empty object. Now we'll go ahead and loop over our post list. So for each post, what we're going to say is that if our valid ID, right, and we have valid ID because we haven't been redirected to the 404 page, if our valid ID matches the post ID, then what we want to do is fill in this fetched post object. So we would say that fetched post.title equals, and then we'll say that if there is a title, we'll return that, or we'll say no title given. Actually, let's just make things a little bit easier on ourselves. Okay, we'll need one more for the content as well. Butterfingers today. Sorry about this, people. I have no idea how I'm managing to hit so many wrong buttons today. They say sometimes you have those days, or it's just one of those days, but it seems like every day is one of those days when it comes to typing for me. I hope what I'm doing here makes sense to you. Almost finished. Now we can make sure that we're actually getting the right information into our fetched post object, so we can log things to the console. All right, let's get rid of any unnecessary console log statements. There aren't any. Okay. Well, at this point, let me just go grab an ID out of the posts list here. So this ID should match, we know, a post in the post list because that's where we got it. Okay, so if we follow that route, okay, and we look over in the console and we see that we actually have the post that corresponds to that ID, right? So the post title was Hello All, right? Remember, this is the ID that ends with 6400. Right, so you go in here, 6400. The title is Hello All. The author is Susan Thomas. The date of publication was December 12, 2019. And we see that we have all that here. So we're creating our fetched post object as we should, or as we hope to. So now we can use that and display it. Alright, so now we'll display the title first. Actually, let's create a div and let's just call this, we'll give it a class name of post. we'll say that this will be the post title. Remember, we're using fetched post now, so it'd be fetched post.title. In this case, I want to make my text small, so I'll use small. And we'll say, as we said before, published on, and then this will be the date, by, and then this will be the author. And then below that, I'll separate the metadata from the blog post body by putting in a horizontal line. And then below that, we'll display the content. Now remember, to display the content, we'll need our Markdown parser, so we'll have to create a Markdown component. So we have to import Markdown from React Markdown. So our first prop is source, and that equals, in this case, fetched post.content. And our second prop is escape HTML, and we set that equal to false to render the HTML. And then let's go into our style sheet. Since this is a page, we'll be using pages.css. At least that's the way I set it up. All right, in pages.css, let's create or use the post selector. And we'll say that we'll display things the way that we did on the home page. We'll say let the width equal 40% of the page. And remember, this is not mobile responsive. Like I said, I'm not going into that much detail. I'm just showing you how to actually build the blog. You can style it up yourself, and I'm sure you'll do a better job of that than I ever would. All right, so how are we looking here? Okay, good. So everything is centered. This is what our individual blog post page would look like. Okay, but we had to manually add in that ID to the path, so we don't want to have to do that. What we'll want to do is on our home page, we'll want to have links to the individual blog posts. So here, I'll turn this into a link. I'll turn also the read more text into a link. So if we go back to our post list file, all right, the title is where we'll want to put in our first link, so we'll have to bring in links from React Router DOM. And we'll just put them in here. And we'll put the post title inside the link. The links will go to, and now we have to give it the path, right? So it'll be post, and then we'll pass in the ID as a parameter, and that would be post.id. Okay, so let's see what that does for us. All right, so the links are made, and we don't want these underlines, and we don't like that text color. So remember before I created a class called links, and that was in the components.css, and that gave us our link style. So we'll just use that class again. Okay, so we're already importing that style sheet. So what we can do is we can just say class name equals Alright, good. So if we click on it, we go to the individual post page. That's good. We can go back home. Alright, good. So we can go to individual posts just by clicking on the post title on the home page. And we can do the same thing for the read more text. So we'll just copy this, put it in here. Right, we're not using post title, so get rid of that. We'll put read more inside of the link. Alright, so these are also linkified now. We can click on them, and those take us to our individual blog posts. Good. Alright, and then remember, if we enter in an invalid ID, say 5555, alright, that'll take us, oh wow. Okay, so that brings up another problem that I should get to right now. This is considered a valid ID according to our logic at this point. Excuse me. What we're saying here is that in our post.js file, as long as we have an integer, right, we're good. Right now what we want to do is we want to also say that if we can't find that we can't find a post ID in the set of posts that we loop over, if we can't find one that matches valid ID, according to this logic, then we want to also redirect the user to the 404 page. Alright, so we can do that easily enough. What you can do is you can create a variable, and we don't want to use const here because this isn't going to be allowed to be changed. We want to use let, and we'll say post exists equals false. So for the time being, before we loop over the post list, we'll want to say that there is no post with that ID. But after we once we are looping over our post list and we're checking out each individual post, we can say that if the valid ID does match the post ID, then post exists becomes true. Okay, and then just to make sure that that's working for us, we can log things to the console. Alright, so here we don't have this a post with this ID in our post list. So if I refresh the page, oh wait, we haven't set up that logic yet. Scratch that. Don't worry about it. Go into your console. We see false, right? We don't have that post ID in the post list. But if we go back here and we click on a post that should have a valid ID, that becomes true. So it works. So all we need to do now is we can say if post exists equals false, that means after we loop over all of the posts in the post list and we still get that post exists equals false, then we can just render or redirect the user to the 404 page. Alright, so valid links are working. Now if we enter in an invalid ID that doesn't correspond to any post in the post list, say again 454545, that takes us to our 404 page, and that's good, and that's what we wanted to do. So I hope that at this point you're feeling really good about creating a blog yourself without using, say, a platform like Gatsby. And that in this video, we've added a dynamic route. We've made it so that we can display individual blog posts as their own pages dynamically using a blog post page template. And in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to actually try to deploy our blog. And we'll probably just do it to GitHub pages, not Netlify. And when we do, we're going to find that we run into a problem, or at least I expect that we will. And I've set things up that way on purpose. Of course, who knows? Maybe something will have been updated and we won't run into the problem. Maybe I'm using a version of a certain package that. Well, let me just say this before I ramble on too long. The problem is going to be with React Router. There's something in the way that we set it up. So I'll leave that to you to try to find it, but don't drive yourself crazy if you can't. And like I said, next time we'll work on deploying this blog. So thank you as always. I appreciate you checking me out. And if you have any questions or concerns about this tutorial or any other ones, please leave a comment in the comment section below the video description. So I will see you next time. Cheers.